Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take those big foundational concepts, the ones we often take for granted, and we really dig into the source material. We're here to see if centuries of, well, inherited belief actually line up with the original texts.
And today, we're diving into a concept that's, frankly, massive.
Yeah.
It underpins so much hope, and maybe also quite a bit of fear, for billions of people. Heaven. We're not just asking the simple question of what is it? We're doing a pretty radical check on its geography, and maybe even more importantly, its timing.
That's exactly right. And our source material for this deep dive is centered on a really exhaustive reexamination of Scripture, linguistically and metaphysically, by Dr. Roy E. Richmond. His critique feels especially timely, maybe even a bit pointed. He highlights this pattern, you see, where popular religious figures, often when addressing suffering, promote books about a future post-death paradise. But then, almost simultaneously, they dust off older material about a soon-coming rapture. And this seems to happen specifically during times of intense global anxiety, like, say, a recent war.
It really does feel like a cycle, doesn't it?
Yes.
Fear and promise, promise and fear. Dr. Roy basically argues that this popular messaging, the whole idea of a physical escape when life gets tough.
Yeah.
Well, he argues it's theologically unsound.
Unsound how?
He connects that promise of going away directly to, well, the exploitation of anxiety.
Yeah.
His point is, if you believe your ultimate fulfillment is somewhere else, somewhere later, then you're kind of easily influenced, maybe even controlled, by those promising you the ticket to get there.
That's a strong claim. And his core argument seems to challenge the very foundation of that entire belief structure. Dr. Roy states, pretty bluntly actually, that the Bible does not teach a flying away rapture to some planet called heaven.
Right. Nor does it teach, he says, that when you die, you physically pack your bags and relocate to a specific place called heaven. It's a direct challenge.
So our mission then in this deep dive is to really rigorously analyze Dr. Roy's assertion. He's proposing that these biblical texts, if you return them to their original language and, importantly, their metaphysical context, they describe something else entirely.
Something internal. Not a physical departure, but an inner state of awakened awareness, a state of divine union. So the core challenge we're tackling, based purely on this source material, is, does the Bible actually teach departure, or does it teach awakening?
Okay, let's jump right into that. We need to start at the root, the linguistic foundation of this whole thing. Let's call this our foundation section. If, as Dr. Roy claims, the idea of physically going to heaven isn't really in the Bible, where on earth did it come from?
Well, Dr. Roy traces it back to something he calls inherited consequence thinking. It's this idea that beliefs get passed down, layered with centuries of translation choices, religious dogma hardening over time, and often interpretations rooted in fear.
Inherited consequence thinking. I like that phrase.
Yeah, and he argues the traditional belief system relies heavily on translations that perhaps prioritize theological convenience, maybe even control, over strict linguistic accuracy. Fidelity to the original meaning sometimes took a back seat.
That's a really crucial distinction he's making there. He contrasts this inherited fear-based system with what he calls the logos voice of Elohim Ruach breath. Now, before we dive deeper, we should probably clarify those terms for you, our listener. They're quite specific.
Absolutely. Good point. So the logos voice in Dr. Roy's framework refers to the original divine creative utterance. Think of it as the pure, untainted spiritual message, the core idea.
Okay.
And Elohim Ruach breath. This is his specific way of describing the divine spirit, or maybe better, the creative energy of existence itself. He chooses this phrase very intentionally, trying to bypass some of the limited, maybe personified or overly masculine connotations that can come with terms like Holy Spirit or even God.
So it emphasizes the energy, the flow.
Exactly. It emphasizes that the divine is this energetic breath that sustains all life. It's continuously present, it's flowing, it's fundamentally non-local, not contained in one spot.
Got it. So the issue isn't with that original logos voice or the Elohim Ruach breath, but with how that divine utterance got filtered, maybe misinterpreted, definitely mistranslated over thousands of years. And Dr. Roy actually pinpoints the error down to just two core words. That seems almost too simple.
It does seem simple on the surface, but the impact is huge. Yes, he argues that the focus narrows down, quite astonishingly, to two specific words that became the primary architects of this idea of a celestial address we call heaven.
Okay, what are they?
In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word is shamayim. That's Strong's number 8064. Its actual linguistic meaning, Dr. Roy points out, is simply lofty, or maybe the sky where clouds move. It's descriptive of the atmosphere right above us.
Just the sky.
Yeah.
And the New Testament equivalent in Greek.
That would be Oranos.
Yeah.
And again, its core meaning is simply the sky and air, highly descriptive of our immediate physical surroundings, the atmosphere, or, anything elevated. Both words, Shamayim and Oranos, originally pointed to an atmospheric reality or just a sense of physical height.
The sky. So, wait, if the words literally just meant sky, how did they possibly morph into the specific place where God lives that you travel to when you die? That seems like a massive leap.
That is precisely the crux of Dr. Roy's critique. He demonstrates, through textual analysis, that translators improperly, he argues, and perhaps even intentionally over time, added the definition, the abode of God, to these terms.
They just added it.
They layered that meaning onto the existing definition of sky. And that single addition, he claims, fundamentally shifts the entire theological landscape. It transforms the concept. It takes it from describing spatial height or the atmosphere around us, a realm that could potentially be everywhere, and turns it into a fixed, distant, geographical realm occupied by the divine.
Which then necessitates travel.
Exactly. It necessitates travel, it implies separation, it requires death as a transition, and relocation to reach it. The whole paradigm shifts.
Well, why? Why would translators make such a profound change? Going from sky to God's celestial house feels like more than just a subtle nuance.
While Dr. Roy suggests this wasn't accidental, he posits that this shift was actually pretty essential for establishing and maintaining centralized religious authority and control.
How so?
Think about it. If heaven is a distant, specific location, it naturally requires authorized guides, priests, church structures, specific doctrines to map the route, interpret the signs, and essentially, sell the ticket.
Ah, okay. Control the access.
Right. But if heaven is actually an internal state of awakened awareness, accessible here and now, well then no external authority is strictly necessary for that realization. The power shifts inward. So that move from an immanent state, something within us, to a transcendent place, something far away, fueled centuries of dogma, often built around fear and reward systems managed by institutions.
Wow, okay. That puts the traditional belief in a completely different light. It starts to sound less like a pure spiritual revelation and maybe more like, well, an organizational necessity for the religion itself.
That's certainly the implication Dr. Roy draws, which leads us directly to the core metaphysical counterargument he presents. Heaven, in this view, is not a geographical realm you reach by dying. It is the state of awakened awareness in divine union.
Union, not location.
Precisely. He argues the original writers were speaking of union, not distance. They were talking about awakening, not departing. The entire focus moves radically inward, away from any kind of relocation, and squarely towards realization now.
That definitely sets the stage. It's a completely different framework. So let's use this framework to examine some of the specific scriptural passages that are most frequently trotted out to justify the traditional view. We absolutely have to start with John chapter 14, verses 2 and 3. This is ground zero for so many people's idea of their, golden condo waiting for them up there.
Oh, absolutely. This passage is almost universally known, especially in the King James Version. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And the traditional interpretation, which Dr. Roy labels the fear-based KJV meaning, takes this completely literally.
Right. The idea is Jesus physically leaves Earth, becomes a sort of celestial contractor, and actually constructs individual heavenly homes, like literal mansions, for believers to move into after they die.
It's a very comforting image, isn't it? Especially for someone grieving. It offers a tangible sense of future security, a place to go. But Dr. Roy's linguistic deep dive aims to completely dismantle this celestial construction project.
How does he do that? Where does he start?
He starts by focusing intently on the nuances in the original Greek, and also considering the Aramaic that would have been spoken. Let's take the Greek word for house first. It's oikia.
Okay, oikia.
Now, while oikia can mean a physical dwelling, Dr. Roy emphasizes its secondary and perhaps richer, meaning inner habitation.
Inner habitation. Okay, that immediately shifts the perspective, doesn't it? From external architecture to an internal reality.
Instantly. Then we get to that famous word often translated as mansions.
Yeah.
The Greek is monai. Now, if we were genuinely talking about physical architecture, mansions might work. Sort of. But linguistically, Dr. Roy points out, monai more accurately signifies abiding states of consciousness. Or you could think of them as stages of spiritual experience or realization.
Wait, so not rooms in a building, but levels of awareness, levels of realization.
Exactly. States of consciousness, not physical structures. And you can see how that's a truly massive difference. It requires you, the listener, to completely reframe the entire message.
It certainly does. And what about the Aramaic context?
Right. If we consider the Aramaic, the language, the consecrated messenger Jesus likely spoke, the phrase is Beth Ab. This means the house of the Father. Dr. Roy interprets this Aramaic phrase as signifying awareness of the source. So you're combining the concept of dwelling not as a structure, but as an awareness and inner state that is perpetually sourced in and connected to the divine.
Okay, let's try to put this metaphysical interpretation together then. What does it actually mean when the consecrated messenger says, I go to prepare a place for you? If it's not about building celestial condos, what kind of preparation is actually happening?
Allegorically, in this interpretation, the house, the Okia, the Beth Ab, symbolizes the divine mind itself, the universal source of all awareness, the ground of being.
Okay, the Father's house is the divine mind.
And the mansions, the moni, are the various levels of awakened perception or states of consciousness that are available within that universal divine mind.
Different ways of experiencing that awareness.
Exactly. So when the messenger says, I go to prepare a place, Dr. Roy argues this means the messenger, as the embodiment of that awakened consciousness, enters a higher state of realization first. He fully embodies it, demonstrating that this state of complete union is accessible to human awareness.
So he's not packing a suitcase for a trip. He's essentially setting an example. He's ascending in consciousness to show the way.
Precisely. The purpose isn't spatial travel. It's so that others might follow inwardly, within their own consciousness. They aren't meant to follow him to a distant star. They're meant to follow his state of realization. The preparation, then, is the realization itself. The messenger demonstrates that full conscious union with the Father's awareness is possible for humanity, thereby preparing the path, clearing the way, for the seeker's own internal journey to that same realization.
So the journey isn't, 10 billion light years up. It's maybe 5 inches inward into the heart or mind. That's a profound shift. But hang on, doesn't this phrasing, I go to prepare, still sort of imply that we currently are dwelling in an unprepared state, or that the place isn't ready for us yet?
That's a subtle but important point. Dr. Roy's key takeaway here, as I understand it, is that in the vast house of the divine mind, you already dwell. You were never actually separated from it. The Elohim Ruach breath within you, that divine energy, has already prepared your innate awareness to abide in peace. The peace, the place, the moni, is found within your immediate awareness, accessible right now, totally independent of your geographic location or whether your body is alive or dead.
So the unprepared state isn't the place itself, but maybe our recognition of it.
Exactly. The unprepared state is simply the condition of forgetting our eternal habitation. It's living in ignorance of the mansion we already occupy within the Father's house. The preparation is really about remembering or awakening to where we already are.
That completely dismantles the scarcity model of salvation, doesn't it? The idea that heaven is a limited resource you have to earn or wait for.
Okay, let's move on then. Section 3. Here the stakes get maybe even higher because we're looking at our perceived citizenship and the whole fraught question of what it means to be absent from the body. Let's start with Philippians chapter 3, verse 20.
Right. The famous line often rendered as, our conversation is in heaven, or in many modern translations, our citizenship is in heaven. And the traditional interpretation just assumes this means the believer's true legal status, their passport, their actual citizenship, exists in a distant paradise, a future realm they'll eventually inherit or immigrate to.
Makes sense in that framework. But Dr. Roy's linguistic deep dive focuses again on the Greek, this time the word politima, and how it connects back to oranos.
Yes, politima is a really rich word. It absolutely can mean citizenship or community, but it also carries the sense of the administration of government, the Constitution, the principles by which a community lives and operates. Okay, so more than just a passport, it's like the operating system of your life.
That's a great way to put it. And when you combine that idea, the operating principles, with oranos, which, remember, Dr. Roy interprets as elevated awareness rather than just the physical sky, well, the meaning fundamentally changes again.
So Paul isn't talking about filing paperwork for some kind of celestial visa. He's describing a governing principle for how to live now.
Precisely. Dr. Roy argues Paul declared that our true being, our authentic nature, our operative set of principles, our politima, already belongs to the heavenly dimension of consciousness, right here, right now. Heaven, in this sense, is our original citizenship. It's the awareness of the divine life that is always within us. The awakened person lives from this higher, eternal reality even while walking around on Earth.
So heaven isn't reached later.
It's remembered now. Dr. Roy emphasizes this again and again. Our authentic identity is this internal state of divine awareness. That's our true commonwealth.
That's fascinating. But I can hear a listener asking, if Dr. Roy suggests our true citizenship is now in this elevated awareness, does that mean we should just check out, stop engaging with earthly governments, politics, society?
That's a really important practical question. And no, Dr. Roy isn't advocating for withdrawal or quietism. It's more about a fundamental change in motivation and perspective. If your true citizenship, your core identity, is rooted in elevated awareness, then your engagement with the world shifts. It moves away from being driven by fear, scarcity, tribalism, or self-interest, and towards being guided by divine principles, things like inherent justice, unconditional love, compassion, seeing the whole.
So you don't abandon the earthly polis, the community?
No, you seek to bring the principles of the heavenly politima, that consciousness of wholeness and peace, into the earthly one. It means acting from a place of recognized wholeness, rather than constantly striving for external gain or validation.
Okay, that clarifies the practical application. Now let's tackle that other heavyweight passage. See Corinthians chapter 5, verse 8. This must be one of the most frequently recited texts at funerals. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord.
Absolutely. And traditionally, this is taken as almost self-evident proof that physical departure, death, is the necessary prerequisite for achieving spiritual presence with the divine. The physical dissolution of the body is seen as the essential step needed to bridge the gap between our earthly existence and the distant divine presence.
Death becomes the doorway.
Yes. But Dr. Roy, again, looks closely at the Greek and suggests this isn't about a physical journey triggered by death, but rather a profound transformation of awareness.
How does the linguistic deep dive show that transformation? What are the key words here?
He points to a careful contrast Paul employs using two specific Greek verbs. The first is ektomizai. This literally means something like to be away from home, but in this context, Dr. Roy interprets it as to step outside a limited awareness dwelling. It's the act of releasing the fixed, narrow perspective that identifies solely with the physical body and its limitations, stepping out of body consciousness.
Okay, so stepping outside of the feeling or the conviction that I am only this physical form.
Exactly. And the contrasting verb is endamuzai. This means to be at home in, or to dwell in. Dr. Roy interprets this as to dwell as divine presence. So the contrast Paul is drawing isn't between being in a body on earth and being out of a body in heaven. It's between being away from home by identifying with the limited body mind and being at home by dwelling in the awareness of the ever-present divine reality.
So it's less like taking a trip to a faraway place after death and maybe more like stepping out of a small dark closet and suddenly realizing you've been standing in a vast sunlit stadium the entire time.
That's a fantastic analogy. It's entirely a shift in focus, a shift in consciousness, a shift in identification. Dr. Roy argues this verse describes a transformation of awareness that is possible, even intended, while we are still in physical form. To be absent from the body, in this reading, means to release that tight grip of body consciousness, that narrow identification with physical limits, and instead to live from the awareness of the omnipresent divine. It's about realizing and inhabiting the spacious new home, the endamazai of the Elohim Ruach breath life, right now.
That is such a profound difference. It means the goal isn't actually death. The goal is spiritual realization, freedom from that limited identity now.
And that completely changes the urgency and the focus of the passage, doesn't it? The takeaway for you, the listener, becomes incredibly immediate. Why wait? As Dr. Roy puts it, do not wait for death to discover you are the presence of Elohim Ruach breath. Step out of the narrow chamber now, perhaps through meditation, spiritual practice, contemplation, or just radical acceptance of your inherent wholeness, and dwell in the spacious life of I exist.
That is exceptionally powerful. It shifts everything from future hope to present potential. Okay, let's shift gears slightly into section 4. Here we confront two very specific narratives that have been heavily literalized in popular thought. First, Luke chapter 23, verse 43. This is the famous exchange on the cross between the consecrated messenger and the thief. Today you will be with me in paradise.
Right, and the traditional view sees this as almost Exhibit A, definitive proof of immediate post-mortem entry into a specific celestial location. The thief dies, and boom, he gets instantly transported to heaven, or at least paradise.
Seems straightforward on the surface. But Dr. Roy, going back to the linguistics, highlights the critical importance of the Aramaic phrasing here, something that often gets smoothed over or lost in the Greek and subsequent English translations.
Indeed. He argues that in the Aramaic, which was the language of the actual dialogue, the placement of the word today is absolutely key. It's structurally different than how it often reads in English. The Aramaic structure, he contends, supports the interpretation. Amen, I say to you today, comma, you exist with me in an inner state of awareness, not a location called paradise. The emphasis shifts to the immediacy of the affirmation and the spiritual realization happening in that moment on that day, not necessarily the timing of their post-mortem travel plans.
Wow. Okay. So the promise wasn't necessarily about a future location they'd reach later that day, but about the quality of his awareness, his state of mind, right then and there. And what about the word paradise itself?
Good question. The word translated as paradise is pardaisa. His root meaning is essentially a garden, often a walled garden, a place of delight and peace. Metaphysically, Dr. Roy interprets this not as a geographic location you need a passport for, but again as an inner state of awareness, the recovery of original joy, harmony with the source, the inner garden of the soul.
So the messenger wasn't handing out a travel itinerary for later that afternoon. He was affirming an immediate psychological and spiritual shift happening within the dying man's own perspective. He had found peace in that very moment, despite the horrific circumstances.
That's the core of the metaphysical reading. Jesus was affirming the man's present awakening. Even amidst the suffering and dissolution of the body, the thief's awareness had turned inward towards divine peace. He had accessed the inner garden of restored joy. Dr. Roy uses the analogy of the cross quite beautifully here. He says, imagine two states of awareness metaphorically hung there. The outer state of guilt, suffering, limitation, and the inner state of realization, peace, connection. When the higher awareness, represented by the messenger, speaks truth to the consciousness willing to receive it, the thief, the inner state of peace, the pardaisa, appears immediately. The profound promise is your external circumstances, even death itself, cannot ultimately separate you from the present joy and peace available within the source.
That feels like a far more deeply comforting message than just waiting for a ticket to a distant reward after suffering ends. Okay, now let's tackle the other great point of contention, maybe the most explosive one in modern times. The rapture, as described primarily in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. This passage is the absolute bedrock for the popular evangelical idea of believers being physically caught up into the clouds to meet God in the air, escaping earthly tribulation.
Yes, this is the iconic physical rapture interpretation. It has dominated so much of modern evangelical theology, spawning countless books, movies, and a very specific kind of end times expectation. The core idea is a literal mass physical ascension, a removal from a chaotic earth before a final judgment.
Highly dramatic. But let's apply Dr. Roy's linguistic tools again. What happens when we look closely at the Greek words used here?
Okay, the key term usually translated as caught up, which really gives that sense of a physical snatching or removal, is the Greek word harpazo. Now, harpazos can mean to seize or snatch away, but linguistically and contextually, Dr. Roy points out, it also carries meanings like to awaken suddenly, to be seized by an experience like a revelation, or to claim something eagerly for oneself. It strongly implies an abrupt internal shift or realization.
So, maybe not physically snatched away from Earth, but suddenly seized by realization, awakened in consciousness. But how does Dr. Roy address the rest of the imagery? It still sounds very physical. You have the dead rising first and then meeting the Lord in the air. That feels hard to interpret non-physically, regardless of Harpaz's nuances.
That is the critical challenge, absolutely. Dr. Roy addresses this by fundamentally redefining the context and the symbols. If we operate from the premise established earlier that the core message is about internal metaphysical reality then, 1. The dead, who rise first, aren't necessarily physically decomposed bodies climbing out of graves. They are those who are spiritually asleep in limited body consciousness, the spiritually unaware or forgetful. Their rising is their sudden awakening, harpazo, to their true divine nature.
Okay, the dead are the spiritually unaware awakening. What about meeting in the air?
2. The air, the medium where this meeting supposedly occurs, is reinterpreted. It's not the literal physical atmosphere with clouds and oxygen. Instead, Dr. Roy connects air back to the concept of pneuma or ruach breath, spirit. So the air is understood as the atmospheric voice or presence of Elohim ruach breath. It's the all-pervading field of divine consciousness itself, the atmosphere of spirit where union naturally occurs.
So meeting in the air becomes meeting within the divine breath or spirit field.
Exactly. So If we apply this metaphysical conclusion, the entire rapture narrative transforms. It's no longer about a future physical escape plan. It describes a potential, perhaps sudden, collective spiritual awakening. Caught up, harpazo, means being lifted into realization, transcending the limitations of purely material identification, but not necessarily being physically removed from the earth.
And the other elements. The trumpet.
Allegorically, the trumpet isn't a literal brass instrument heralding a physical event. It symbolizes the inner voice, the logos, the call of truth sounding within consciousness, calling awareness upward into union with its source. And meeting in the air, as we said, symbolizes achieving conscious union within that all-encompassing divine breath field, the ruach, which is omnipresent, not geographically located up there. Dr. Roy might urge, rise now, awareness into the true atmosphere of your sacred self. You are already one with the Elohim ruach breath.
This completely reframes it. It shifts the entire focus away from an external, future, often terrifying event that seems dependent on global chaos and war, and towards an internal, potentially immediate and universally available reality of awakening. It seems designed to remove the fear that's often baked into waiting for an apocalypse.
It absolutely does. The perceived need for a physical escape route, a lifeboat off the planet, simply evaporates when you realize the destination isn't a place, but the quality of consciousness you inhabit right now.
Okay, let's move into session 5 then. This deals with those concepts of divine reward and future fulfillment, which traditionally really cement the idea of needing that post-mortem external paradise. Revelation chapter 21 gives us the vision of the New Jerusalem.
Yes, verses 2 and 3. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. This is often held up as the ultimate hope, the final destination. A glorious future physical city made of gold and jewels, literally descending from the sky to earth, serving as the eternal reward for the faithful.
The imagery is undeniably stunning, incredibly powerful. But again, I assume the linguistic view challenges its literal physicality.
It does. Dr. Ray dissects the key phrase, Kaini Jerusalem. Kaini means new, but more deeply renewed or fresh. And Jerusalem fundamentally means foundation or awareness of peace. So the New Jerusalem, Kaini Jerusalem, is interpreted not as a new city, but as a renewed awareness of peace.
Renewed peace. Okay, and what about the coming down from God out of heaven part? That still sounds like movement from up there to down here.
Right. But if heaven, Uranos, is understood as the higher dimension of divine awareness, then coming down means ascending into visibility. It signifies this renewed awareness of peace becoming manifest, becoming expressed and visible in human experience.
Yeah, so the spiritual awareness of peace itself is what is descending, becoming tangible and visible on earth within humanity.
Precisely. Metaphysically, Dr. Roy suggests John wasn't seeing a future architectural marvel descending from the clouds. He was seeing divine awareness, the consciousness of perfect peace, descending into expression within people. It represents the blending of heaven, the inner state of realized peace, and earth, the outer manifested experience. The New Jerusalem, in this allegorical reading, is the awakened collective consciousness of humanity, where the divine presence fully inhabits and transforms human existence right here, right now. It's the realization of peace on earth, not the arrival of a specific building complex.
That completely reframes the whole apocalyptic vision, doesn't it? It moves it from being about a future physical reward after destruction to being about an internal collective transformation that actually ends conflict and brings peace. And that directly counteracts the kind of fear-mongering about end times that you mentioned Dr. Rowe critiques in the introduction.
It connects back perfectly, yes. Instead of offering an escape from a fearful world into a future city, this interpretation offers the solution within the world. Heaven descends peace, becomes manifest each time human awareness ascends to realize its union with the source. We become the dwelling place, the New Jerusalem, when we embody that Elohim Ruach breath.
That makes sense. And speaking of reward, let's quickly look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 12 from the Sermon on the Mount. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven.
Classic verse, often used as the prime example of post-death compensation theology. Endure persecution now, do good deeds, suffer patiently, and you'll get paid back handsomely later, with interest, in your heavenly bank account.
Seems clear enough in that framework. But what does the original Greek word for reward, which is misthos, actually signify according to Dr. Roy?
Misthos is interesting. While it can mean wages or reward, its more fundamental meaning is fruit or outcome. It's the inherent result or consequence that naturally flows from an action, not necessarily an external bonus payment added later.
The natural result. Okay. And Uranos, Heaven, we've established Dr. Roy reads as divine awareness.
Correct. So putting it together, great is your misthos fruit outcome in Oranos, divine awareness.
So the reward isn't about getting gold bricks delivered to your mansion after you die. It's the immediate inherent result, the fruit of living from a state of divine awareness now.
Exactly that. Dr. Roy states very clearly that the reward is the joy of awakened awareness and OW. It's the inherent fruit, the peace, the wholeness, the sense of connection that naturally arises when you live and act as the creative, spiritual, loving force that you truly are. When you act from love, the misthos, the reward, is the instantaneous experience of peace, wholeness, and conscious union that results from that alignment. Heaven's reward isn't something earned through struggle and redeemed later. It's revealed as inner peace and conscious union the very moment you align yourself with the source within.
That leads us perfectly into section 6, which feels like the most critical part for you, our listener, because it addresses the ultimate question. What actually happens at the point of physical dissolution, the event we call death? If we aren't relocating to a celestial city, what is the nature of eternal life according to this interpretation? We should start with Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 7.
Right, a very poignant verse often read at funerals. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. The traditional reading sees this quite literally. The physical body, dust, decomposes, and the invisible spirit, or sacred self, physically departs the body and travels up or back to a distinct location where God resides, usually equated with heaven.
Seems like a clear separation and journey, but Dr. Roy, predictably, focuses on the Hebrew word used here for spirit, which is ruach.
Yes, ruach, which, as we discussed earlier with Elohim ruach breath, fundamentally means breath, wind, or divine energy, not necessarily a distinct personified entity that travels. And the word return, in this context, he argues, means something more like to flow back to source awareness, or to resume its essential unmanifested state, like breath returning to the air.
So this speaks much more of continuity, transformation, and maybe dissolution back into the source, rather than a discrete entity taking a trip for relocation.
Exactly. Metaphysically, this verse isn't about relocating to a realm miles away. It's about remembering or re-emerging with our source. The Elohim ruach breath, the divine energy that animated the form, never actually leaves the omnipresent divine. It simply continues its eternal movement, its eternal flow. The form, the dust, dissolves back into its constituent elements, but the animating force, the ruach, the breath, remains what it always was, life unbroken. Dr. Roy is quite emphatic on this point. You can never truly depart from the Elohim ruach breath because you exist as the very breath you breathe. The focus shifts entirely from the body going somewhere to the underlying life, resuming its essential formless state.
That idea of continuous, unbroken life really does address the core existential fear associated with death, the fear of annihilation or separation. Now, let's bring this home by looking at the words of the consecrated messenger again in John chapter 3, verse 13. This verse is often used traditionally to emphasize the unique status of Jesus, suggesting only he could enter a physical heaven.
That's right. The verse typically reads something like, "And no man hath ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man, which is in heaven." The traditional reading uses this to claim exclusivity. Only Jesus physically went up there. Therefore, heaven is a real physical place he alone accessed from earth.
But Dr. Roy, looking at the Greek verbs for ascending and descending, finds a different meaning. The words are anabibukin and katabokin.
Yes, anabebukin, translated ascended, he interprets as meaning to ascend in awareness or realization. And katabebukin, translated came down, means to descend into embodiment or physical manifestation.
Okay, so ascending and descending aren't about changes in altitude or geography. They are movements within consciousness, shifts in realization and manifestation.
Absolutely. In this view, heaven is defined not as a location, but as the state of awareness from which the consecrated messenger lives, operates, and which he came to demonstrate is available to all. Ascending and descending are movements within consciousness. The messenger, as the Son of Man, lives simultaneously in the highest awareness, which is in heaven, present tense, even while embodied on earth, came down from heaven. Dr. Roy sometimes calls this the ladder of Jacob within us, the constant rising and descending flow of divine awareness through the inner temple of being.
And the profound message for everyone else, then?
The profound message, the core theme running through this entire analysis, is encapsulated in Dr. Roy's assertion based on this verse. You have never left heaven, you merely forgot where you stand. Heaven is your native state of awareness.
That really feels like the central thread tying all of Dr. Roy's analysis together. Let's try to synthesize his final argument clearly for you, the listener, bringing all these different textual analyses to a head.
His final summary, essentially, is that much of the history of mainstream Christianity, particularly regarding the afterlife, has been interpreted through a lens distorted by fear, literalism, and the desire for institutional control, leading to this pervasive idea of post-mortem relocation. He contends that when examined closely in their original linguistic and metaphysical context, no verse genuinely promises travel to a specific celestial city after death. Instead, every single one of these traditional proof texts, when re-examined, reveals the same underlying logos awareness message. Heaven is the unveiled consciousness of the divine within man.
And the body, what is its role in this?
The body, he states quite poetically, is simply a garment of visibility. It's the temporary means by which the invisible life expresses itself in the realm of form. When this garment dissolves, the being isn't extinguished or sent elsewhere. It is simply, as he puts it, unclothed from limitation and closed upon with light.
And this completely reframes the concept of eternal life itself, moving it from a fragile future hope that feels dependent on behavior or belief
To a guaranteed inherent present reality. He argues the entire religious infrastructure built upon fear of judgment and the hope for a post-mortem reward simply dissolves when one realizes that eternal life isn't something you attain after death, it's the fundamental nature of your being right now. Life, the Elohim Ruach breath, never departs because it was never confined to the body in the first place. It only unfolds. The visible form fades, yes, but the essential being remains as the eternal breath of I exist, timeless, whole, radiant. So to go to heaven isn't a journey, it's simply to awaken, whether now while still embodied or perhaps more fully when the garment is laid aside, to the undeniable reality that we have never ever been separated from the source of all life. You don't go anywhere. You simply continue in your actual state, fully aware, entirely whole, free of the density and limitations of the temporary form.
This has been a really comprehensive and I think for many a fundamentally challenging deep dive into the geography or maybe the non-geography of faith. Let's try to synthesize the absolute key takeaways for you, the learner, listening to this.
I think the central shift, the biggest takeaway, is internalizing this idea. Heaven is not a destination out there beyond the stars waiting for you after death. It is the unveiled, realized consciousness of the divine within man, here and now. Consequently, to go to heaven is not about travel. It's about awakening, while still embodied, to your inherent union with the source.
And the immediate relevance of this knowledge.
The immediate relevance is profound. This understanding serves as a direct antidote to the fear, especially the fear of death and judgment that Dr. Roy suggests is often exploited by some popular religious narratives we mentioned at the start. When this realization is deeply integrated, the event we have called death truly loses its sting. Why? Because nothing essential is lost, and nothing actually departs. The garment of the body ceases to function, yes, but the life, the awareness, the ruach that animated it continues as it always has, unbroken, unharmed, unchanged in its essence.
So the profound relevance for you, listening now, is that it removes the need to constantly look upward or forward for your final salvation, or to await death before you can truly experience life. The kingdom, the peace, the heaven you seek is literally within you, accessible now, ready to be realized.
Absolutely. Think of it like Dr. Roy's analogy. The form dissolves like a wave returning to the sea. But the sea never lost the wave. The wave simply returned to its undifferentiated oneness. The wave always existed as the ocean. It just temporarily forgot its boundless nature during its momentary, visible expression as a wave.
And that leads us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you, drawn directly from Dr. Roy's source material. A question to perhaps sit with. If the form dissolves like that wave returning to the vastness of the sea, yet the sea was never diminished and never lost the wave, then consider this. What new visibility, what currently unimaginable dimension or quality of awareness opens up when the garment of limitation is finally laid aside and you awaken completely and permanently in the boundless life you already are? You do not go anywhere. You live there now.
A powerful truth to contemplate indeed. And perhaps the greatest ongoing challenge to our current, often limited, state of awareness.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. We encourage you to explore these ideas further. We'll see you next time.